Can facts alone dictate moral truths? This question is central to one of philosophy's most enduring debates, one sparked by David Hume over 250 years ago. David Hume, from 1711 to 1776, one of the most influential figures in Western philosophy, is known for his skepticism and contribution to ethics and epistemology. In his work, A Treatise of Human Nature, Hume identified a fundamental issue: the tendency we humans have to derive moral conclusions from factual premises without adequate justification. This gap, famously known as Hume's law, or the is-ought problem, underlines an issue. How do we justify moral principles based on empirical facts? In his work, A Treatise of Human Nature, from 1739, David Hume examines the foundation of moral reasoning. Specifically, in Book 3, Part 1, Section 1, he observes that authors often transition from statements about what is to assertions about what ought to be without providing justification for this shift. He writes, "In every system of morality, which I have hitherto met with, I have always remarked that the author proceeds for some time in the ordinary way of reasoning, and establishes the being of a god, or makes observations concerning human affairs. When of a sudden I am surprised to find that instead of the usual copulations of propositions, is and is not, I meet with no proposition that is not connected with an ought, or an ought not. This change is imperceptible, but is, however, of the last consequence. For as this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation, it is necessary that it should be observed and explained, and at the same time that a reason should be given, for what seems altogether inconceivable, how this new relation can be a deduction from others, which are entirely different from it." The observation he makes here is today known as Hume's law, or the is-ought problem. It asserts that one cannot derive prescriptive statements, that is, what ought to be, solely from descriptive statements, what is. In other words, factual statements about the world do not inherently contain moral directives. Okay, I believe some definitions are in order here. When it comes to descriptive statements, these describe facts or states of the world based on empirical observation or objective truth, if you will. For example, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Prescriptive statements, on the other hand, they try to propose how things should be, introducing normative and value-based judgments. So if we keep on with the example of water, this would turn into we ought to conserve water, or the negative equivalent being we ought not to waste water. Between these two types of statements, there is a logical gap. I think it's best to illustrate this with a concrete example. Say that someone argues that humans ought to eat meat, and he does this by appealing to the fact that it is natural for humans to eat meat. Now, this might sound fairly reasonable, but there's a logical gap. Hume's law points out that there is no logical connective between premise 1 and the conclusion without introducing an external value premise. And in this case it would be something like, it is good for humans to do what is natural for them. And so the actual full logical structure of this argument is, it is natural for humans to eat meat. Then we've got P2, premise 2, it is good to act in accordance with nature. Therefore, humans ought to eat meat. Without premise 2, the argument is incomplete, illustrating the logical gap. Okay, but why does this really matter though? It seems like someone being extra picky. Well, not really. This gap highlights the necessity of examining the premises underlying our moral claims. By drawing attention to the logical disconnections between facts and values, Hume's law helps us to point out and ensure that moral prescriptions are explicitly justified by value-laden premises. And this is rather essential for maintaining intellectual rigor and avoiding unfounded moral assertions. Think of a world where we don't actually tend to Hume's problem, Hume's law, Hume's is-ought problem. In such a world, I might say, humans have always engaged in warfare. A descriptive statement. And from that descriptive statement, I would be able to conclude, therefore, war is morally acceptable. Doesn't this sit rather uneasily? Now, I'm not saying that it isn't good for humans to eat meat, I'm just trying to illustrate an example here. But if we do not explicitly articulate our value-laden premises, we cannot really have rational debates and discussions around these core issues. And so, Hume's law remains deeply relevant, particularly in contexts where scientific findings intersect with ethical or policy decisions. For example, debates on climate change, bioethics, and artificial intelligence nowadays often rely on factual data to inform value-driven choices. And recognizing the is-ought gap ensures that such decisions always include transparent and justified moral reasoning, rather than relying solely on empirical evidence. The is-ought problem challenges us to reflect on the foundation of our moral beliefs. It asks whether we can ever fully justify our moral conclusions, or if we must ultimately accept a leap of faith that bridges facts and values. This question continues to shape philosophical, ethical, and practical debates. What do you think? Leave a comment. See you next time.